Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. This is Desperately Seeking Paul, and our most ambitious week yet continues. 7 podcasts in 7 days, a celebration of the Style Council, and a new episode every day, each one with a different honorary councillor. Now today we stick with the bass guitar to hear from Kevin Miller. From Groovin to Shout to the Top, Kevin was there. Plus he was part of the Soul Squad with Tracie Young, signed to Paul's record label Respond, and touring the world supporting the Style Council. Here's another fabulous honorary councillor with some great stories to tell. So let's get into it. Hi Kevin, thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome.
This is going to be lovely because you were there in very much the early days of the Style Council. But more than that, you were part of the Respond record label and part of the story of Solid Bond as well. So I'm really looking forward to this, Kevin.
That's good stuff. Yeah, I'll try and remember as much as I can. Obviously, the years have not been kind.
I do realise that as I'm talking to some guests, whilst it feels like yesterday, we're talking over... well, like nearly 40 years now, really.
Yeah. I mean, I must admit that there's a lot of memories that, it's like a video recording in your head that you just remember it exactly. And then you're not really sure if that's exactly how it was or, you've embellished over the years. But there's probably other elements. And if you're getting some other guys, from the time on some similar podcasts, then I'm sure there's going to be times that they're going to remember that I've completely forgotten about. Be good.
I'm all up for the embellished stories as well. That's part of the whole thing. The stories get bigger and wilder as we go through this.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories that didn't need any embellishment. But
we will touch on those as well. Great.
Yeah, we might do, yeah.
Let's kick things off. When was it you first heard of Paul Weller?
If you want to go back to the very, very beginning, I mean, I was always playing in bands at school and in the youth club and had a school buddy that played the guitar and I played bass, and one thing led to another, and we were, just mucking around in bands at school. And then when we left, we both decided it would be great to make a living out of playing music. So we ended up playing in a band through a friend of a friend, earning pretty good money playing function gigs on bases and UK Air Force bases, etc. And it was because punk was happening, and we were quite into that. But at the weekends we'd be going and doing ABBA covers and things like that in a band, but getting quite good money. So that one thing led to another, and I think we ended up doing a year away with that band in Germany, playing on all of the US bases, and we were kind of a bit frustrated because of the covers that we were doing in the set, and I think me and Simon Ringer we did a cover of Pretty Vacant, to the bemusement of all the Americans at the time, but we used to do a few police covers and stuff like that in the band. It was when we was over there, I think I first kind of recalled, because the Jam was always there or thereabouts, in the charts, and I remember hearing Eaton Rifles actually in Wiesbaden, and I actually remember the gig because we were supporting some heavy metal, Deep Purple kind of cover band, and we were doing all our ABBA, and well, we weren't all ABBA. It's a bit. I'm jesting a little bit. It was pretty cool. We were doing Chic stuff and Led Zeppelin, and a real mixture because the Americans are, pretty hard to cater for. But anyway, I did that for a year, came back. It was just jobbing around. I was actually a lead singer at the time. We had a little band. We had a very minor record deal with Tower Bell Records, put out a couple of singles. John Peel played our single twice, I think, and we had a review in NME. And they said we sounded like a cross between the Shadows and Spandau Ballet. We got a royalty check less than $5, I think, from the record company anyway. So that we parted companies with the record company, and one thing led to another. And this must have been very early 80s.
What was the name of the band?
Well, we had a few guises, but the band that had the record deal was called Language from Memory. We had a single called Fortune. I didn't do anything, but I think I've still seen it actually on these rare record sites.
I love the story of these US bases because, so technically you're a Forces sweetheart, is that right?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, it was purely a way of making a living playing music, but it was tough playing on those bases all over around Frankfurt area and Ramstein and all those kind of bases. But on a Saturday night, we'd have to play like 5 sets, 45-minute sets.
Wow.
So when we played at some of the smaller clubs, if you like, we were happy when there was a fight. If a fight broke out, we then got an early night, So. But yeah,
like goading the crowd.
Yeah, it was good fun looking back on it. I remember the Sugar Hill Gang, right? Most people would recognise them as probably the first rap record.
So like Doug Wimbish and all that lot, yeah?
They were actually on in this German NCO club, and we were on before them. And that was the first time I'd ever heard that, well, rap. We didn't as we know it now. But
and then obviously the jam split, and Paul ventures into the Style Council, and it would be great to understand where your paths then cross, because there's a whole heap of stuff going on at the time where they've set up Respond Records, which is this label that Paul is able to manage through Polydor, with new artists, new acts from all kinds of people, from The Questions to Tracie Young.
So I was aware of obviously the Jam situation, their last single, which Tracie sang on. So I was aware of who Tracie was. When she had the single out, House That Jack Built, she had an assistant called Hillary, that were the record company Polydor at the time. Hillary used to go drinking in my local pub in Enfield in North London. I think Tracie was in the pub one evening on a Sunday, and we just got chatting, and obviously I knew who she was, and she said, she's looking to put a band together, and I said, well, I know someone. I said, well, I'd really be interested in, being a bass player. I wasn't doing anything at the time, so one thing led to another, and she invited me down to Solid Bond to meet the gaffer, as it were, check me out, So met Paul in Solid Bond. There was a bass there, and he said, can you play the bass line to Give It Some Emotion, which I think she just released. I only heard it on the radio a couple of times, but it wasn't particularly tricky. So I think I played that, and he said, yeah, fine, you'll do. So, I guess I was the founder member of Tracie's band, the Soul Squad.
I should add, she also sang on Speak Like a Child, and then...
Yeah, absolutely,
for the Style Council as well. And then obviously, like you say, there's the House That Jack Built, which was top 10, Give It Some Emotion. And at that point, then the band are recording an album which comes out the following year, Far From the Hurting Kind. But if I remember rightly, those two singles weren't on the album. Was that right?
Yeah, they weren't on the original album, no.
Yeah, which is nuts now when you think about it, isn't it? You have this brand new artist and you're releasing these singles that are doing really well, top 10, top 40. But then you kind of have the album that they're not on them.
Don't know the reasoning for that, really. Paul's a bit like that, though. If you look at the Style Council singles, Shout to the Top was never on any album originally, so if I'm right.
You are. Yeah, you're then the support, I guess, for the tour in terms of Style Council tour in Europe, and Tracie's there with the band, yeah?
So basically, when I was brought in and helped Tracie with, I think she had a guitarist in mind, but then we had to get some other musicians in, and Helen Turner was around, and Helen, I think, played all of the keyboards basically on Far From the Hurting Kind, but she was also working a bit with Paul with the Style Council. But we didn't have guitarists. Most of the guitar on that first album was all Paul, basically. So I think people get that from the fact that Jake Fluckery was the guitarist. So Paul played most of the guitar.
I've been trying to get hold of Jake. No, I haven't. I didn't know that. I know I did know that. And at this point, you're kind of on retainer, right? So you're Solid Bond. Yeah. It's like a 9 to 5 job.
It was exactly right. Yeah, we get our brown paper envelope at the end of the week with Kevin on it, and that's when Nikki was basically the office manager, and she ran the show more or less. Obviously, her dad had an office there, but yeah, it was like going into the office every day in Solid Bond. It was great. Yeah, so a chap called Steve Sadelnik, who I'm still friends with now, a great guy. We auditioned him in a studio in Southwark, and I'll never forget it because I used to rehearse there before with my other band, but it was called Clink Studios basically, and it was actually on the site of Clink Prison. So that was before London had a bustling tourist trade. Obviously it's no longer a studio, it's actually Clink Prison Museum now, but so we met this young guy called Steve, 18, fresh face, straight down from Bradford, and and he was a great guy, so he became the drummer and played all the drums on Far From the Hurting Kind as well. So
he went on to play with Madonna and people like that, yeah?
Yeah, Steve's done a hell of a lot, yeah.
So you're on tour, you're playing with Tracie. At which point do you enter into the Style Council journey? Because there's a couple of singles, particularly around recording for Cafe Blur Time, which is his first album. And like you say, Paul's releasing single after single, but the vast majority of them don't make it onto the album. It's a brand new collection of songs. And you're on a couple of them. So how did that relationship come about?
Do you know what? I can't quite remember the order of how things happened, but when I was playing with Tracie on Far From the Hurting Kind, a lot of the material and the way that I was actually playing at the time was in a particular kind of slapping style, which was a bit of a fashion in bass players at the time. I think I nicked it from Nick Beggs from Kajagoogoo, who and just it was just a style. Obviously, Paul was playing on the album as well, and there was a couple of songs that he had in mind that he wanted that particular style, and I think he couldn't really do it himself. I'm not sure I'm saying that, but I don't know. I mean, Paul was a great bass player. I know Paul played a lot a lot of the bass lines on much of the Style Council stuff. So, I can't remember which came first. I think it might have been Big Boss Groove, actually. I got a phone call from Paul at, in the middle of the night. He probably wasn't. If I remember, I was asleep. But Paul had called me and said, are you coming in to the office tomorrow or into the studio tomorrow? And I said, well, yeah. He said, I've got something, in mind that I'm working on now and I'd like you to play on. Went to the studio next day, and that was Big Boss Groove, which was more or less live, basically, the way it's recorded, as I remember. And I think we only did a couple of takes. I don't think I repaired any of the bass parts either, because obviously things have changed a lot in the studio now. If you put a take down, there's always bits and pieces you want to go back and repair, but I don't remember repairing anything. I can still hear a couple of little mistakes on it, if I listen carefully.
That must be frustrating every time it's on the radio.
Well, they become part of the record, There's loads of mistakes all over Tamla stuff, all good R&B. There's, lots of clashes going on, but it just makes part of the record, yeah.
And that's the 6th single, so that's a double A side. One thing to touch on is the amount of material that's coming out in those early days of the Style Council. It seems like Paul's on a really creative streak and just churning out banger after banger, single after single, but the album is made up of some amazing songs too. But that was a double A side with You're the Best Thing. And weirdly, it's kind of like this thing where they call it, and I'd love to know how much of this you're talking with Paul about. It's called Groovin, which is these 2 tracks, and does brilliantly well. Number 5, 1984. It's the 6th single and the 2nd from Cafe Blur.
To be honest, during those days, it was like a big club, really. The whole Respond, the Questions thing, they got all the guys in the Style Council band, and when we was supporting the Style Council with Tracie on tour in Europe, we'd all meet up at Victoria coach station, get on the Len Wright coach and drive, basically, because Paul hated flying, so we never flew anywhere. It was always driving on the coach, and it was just like a great big school outing. And I just remember at the time just being aware of all the other acts around at the time. They didn't seem to, the Style Council on Paul, we were just the coolest. In the UK, there wasn't anyone around to touch it. We would, and there were so many in jokes around. Just the likes of Duran and Aha, and I don't know. It just seemed we were it felt like that at the time. I just felt that we were in a different stable, should we say.
Yeah, a couple of the other honorary councillors have talked about it feeling like a youth club, but real kind of bonds made that are lifelong bonds. But it seems like, you're travelling the world as well. So you're travelling Europe, you're going to Japan. This is like early 20s for you. This must be so exciting.
It was, yeah. It was. Going to Japan was a great memory. Actually, my best friend is still my best friend now, Toby Chapman. He was the second keyboard player that I auditioned along with Helen Turner, and I'll never forget that. Toby came to Japan with us, and he was my roommate as well. So we never took things too seriously, to be honest. I remember Helen said, we're going to meet this chap that's been recommended from someone from the record company, Easy Hire Studios in North London. And there was a piano there, and there was Toby there. And we said, Helen played something on the piano. And I just said, look, can you do the theme from EastEnders? And do you like a lager, basically? And that was it, and he was in. But yeah, I'll never forget. Paul actually, I found out we were going to Japan when we were in Solid Bond, and it was in the kitchen making a coffee, and Paul just walked in and said, we're off to the land of the rising sun, So I didn't quite realise at the time he meant we all were, So that was great. And I think that was the thing in those days. I think John, went out of his way to make sure that we were all included. And I think, that was part of the deal they did with the Japanese to make sure that Tracie and the band could come as well, as part of this package. So it was a fantastic time out.
And they were huge in Japan, and
they were massive. Yeah.
Was it from day one? So those first gigs.
It was the first time I'd ever got off an aeroplane, and there was loads of screaming girls at the airport. This was very novel for me. Yeah. So, and there was always a bunch of women all waiting outside the hotels everywhere we went, and Paul was obviously huge in Japan from the Jam days, yeah. Obviously, we'd go on early and support Paul, and much of the gigs we would go, into the audience and watch the show. So, and I think it was one gig in Osaka where, and the audiences were so polite, they'd all be sitting down and just politely applauding at the end of the songs. And I think it was the gig in Osaka. Style Council went off, came back on, did an encore, and then all the lights came up, and everyone was thinking it was the end. But then Paul decided to come back on and do another song, and was kind of encouraging everyone to stand up, let loose a little, and it more or less ended up in like a riot. It was just mad. I mean, he stoked the crowd. But yeah, it was crazy tour. Yeah.
Love it. And then the big one, Shout to the Top, which is still a song that I hear on the radio now. It still sounds incredible. Tell me about that one. So this was the Style Council's 7th single.
Yeah, it's a shame really. Paul said, I've got something I'm working on. I'd like you to try and see what comes out, put a bass line to it. And the feel originally was very different to how it ended up. So, and I put a couple of different bass lines on it. I think there's an American mix, which is slightly different to the UK mix as well. So it was just Paul asking me, I just happened to be around and actually doing something on my song. So,
you're like, why not?
Yes,
why not?
Yes, Governor.
Will there be more in my brown envelope at the end of the week?
Yeah. No, so sitting on the sofa in the control room and Paul saying, this is how it goes, and just playing the track back, and same with Everything to Lose. I think Paul had an idea for fretless bass on that, and I had coincidentally just taken order of a new bass with a fretless neck. So, and that was the same thing, just really in the studio with Mick and Paul, just talking through the chord progression, just putting a bass line down. So the version I played on was the one with Steve's lyrics, which was the album version. Yeah, I think Paul re-recorded it as You Ever Had It Blue.
Was that in Absolute?
And that was for Absolute Beginners, right?
Yeah. In terms of touring with the band and with Tracie, are there any gigs that stand up?
Paul asked me to play the bass at the Style Council, put a band together and a set together for the miners at the Royal Festival Hall. So I played at that gig. Yeah, that was a good gig. Wham were actually top of the bill, or they shared top of the bill with the Style Council, but they came on and in all their white t-shirts with Choose Life, etc. But they just mimed. Yeah, and I thought it was funny at the time. But I'll never forget the following week in Melody Maker, there was a headline and it had Mimer's Benefit, and it was just a write-up of the gig, but obviously alluding to the fact that George and Andrew had chosen to not play live. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Especially on a bill, where there's like Annie Whitehead and some real, great musos, and
how funny.
Not playing live, yeah. I mean, they had a good band. I don't know why they made that decision.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I don't know, maybe it came later, but certainly George was able to perform live. We saw some incredible performances and various things over the years, didn't we? Tell me about Paul Weller's broken arm.
Yeah. So, we was in a tour in Europe. I think it was Germany. I'm not absolutely 100% sure, but basically, we stopped at a service station and Paul was just larking about, which was nothing unusual, and chasing around with one of the backing singers around the car park, and basically slipped and landed awkwardly, and they took him to the hospital. When we got to the hotel, I think it was about 6:30, I'd seen someone in the lobby and they said, "Oh, you heard about Paul? He's broken his arm." So, and there was a gig that night, right? But I think Anthony knew most of the set on guitar. I just sat in the reception of the hotel with Anthony, just working out the bass lines for some of the Style Council stuff, so I could go in and stand in that night so Paul could just do the gig in a sling. Yeah, so he finished the tour. No gigs got cancelled.
Right, wow. And was he in full plaster, or was it just like a bandage? Or?
Yeah, well, it was a trendy kind of navy blue sling, if I remember rightly. I think there's a rare clip on YouTube from the TV show appearance that he did when we were over there, and I think that's of him. Well, it's actually of him and Mick doing Ever Changing Moods in the studio, and then there's a live clip from a gig where he's got his arm in a sling.
So can you remember your last gig?
No, I can't really. I can't remember the last time we played live.
This Tracie story in terms of Respond is really interesting because you were recording a second album. You were involved in and people might not know this, that there was a second album, but Polydor decided to not release it, or Respond was disbanded. How did that come about?
I don't really know the full-on politics, to be honest. But yeah, I think Paul was obviously going through discussions with Polydor because Respond was signed to Polydor. So for whatever reason, and it's a shame because at the time we thought that was a brilliant second album. Tracie's second album, there's some great stuff on there. But yeah, unfortunately, he got shelved for whatever. And I don't really know the real reason, but yeah, that would have been obviously great to go out and tour that. That unfortunately never happened. So yeah, it's sad that that never got to be. But it was really good that Tracie actually persevered, and I think she she ended up with the rights to the album. It took her a long time, but finally it got released by Cherry Red, I believe, a few years ago. So
yeah, and the album No Smoke Without Fire, it's some really good stuff on it. And you wonder why it didn't come out at the time and what that would have meant for her and her career and you guys as a band and stuff.
I know it's obviously, sound a little bit dated now, but at the time I thought that was a real classy piece of work, and she did good.
And Paul was so hands-on with songwriting and being part of that mix on the first album. Was that still the same thing for the second?
Not quite so much, no. So I think Tracie had much more of a hold of the reins, if you like, for the second album. She was getting her own way a little more, should we say. I'm sure she won't mind me saying that. Yeah. But the second album was a lot more musicians involved, different writers coming in. In fact, I don't think there's a Paul song on the second album.
You mentioned John Weller. So, I mean, John Weller, so many people have talked about, obviously, his influence and his work with the Jam, but also the Style Council and the fact that he was still such an important part of that mix and an important part of, wheeling and dealing, getting the gigs, getting the record deals. Also, in terms of creating this family vibe for the band and for the youth club, I'm going to call it. How important was he to you in the mix?
John was great. Yeah, he really was. We did a few gigs in the States, actually, with Tracie, and John came. So he was, it's quite low key, small little clubs, around the East Coast, with a gig at in New York at the Ritz. So John came really to be our manager, if you like. So we was just in a little minibus. But when we got to New York, he invited my mother, who lives in the States. She lives in Las Vegas. But he said, Kev, why don't you invite your mum over to New York? She'd never seen me play live before. So John arranged all of that, sorted a room in the Drake Swiss for my mum and paid for the flight and everything. Yeah. So this is exactly what John was like. Brilliant.
Oh, wow. How lovely. And what did your mum make of it?
Yeah, well, she was okay, and then until she got the bill, I think we had coffee in the reception and the Drake Swiss. She said, "Oh, I get this," and up until that point, she was all right.
Thank God for that. I thought she would be like, "Oh, what are you doing, wasting your life on the bass guitar? Get a proper job."
No. Yeah, no, that was my dad's.
All right.
My dad's angle. John was great. I remember. He's like a dad, everyone's dad, really. And we was on tour once in, I think it was Austria, and it was my birthday. Slipped me like 50 quid and went, "Yo, son, have a drink on your birthday."
Have you kept in touch with Paul? Have you heard anything from Paul since? Have you seen Paul since the start?
Yeah, I saw Paul a couple of years ago, just randomly. I booked a couple of tickets to see Leia at the Holborn Pizza Express. I noticed she was on, and I was actually playing there with a band of my own, and so I saw that she was on the bill a few weeks later. So I just out of interest, curiosity, I wanted to go and check her out. So the evening of the gig, I nearly didn't go because I was going to go with a mate who let me down at the last minute, and my wife didn't want to go. Can't go on my own. And anyway, I decided to go. I thought, well, I didn't want to sit there like a lemon in a pizza restaurant, but I decided to go anyway. Walked in and sitting at the next table was Nikki Weller, Shane White, Steve's ex-missus, and Mick Talbot's wife. So, yeah, it was a great evening. So I'm glad I went. Nikki said, "Oh, my brother's coming later." So, I met Paul at that gig. Great, great to see him. A little hug, when you could actually hug people. But it was good to see him. Yeah, he's not changed a bit.
Paul's daughter, Leia's, she's got a great voice. There's so much of DC Lee's voice in there.
Exactly, yeah. She has got a great voice.
Absolutely beautiful.
And, one thing whenever we used to be on tour, always used to make a point of coming out to, because we'd probably be just knocking back beers in the dressing room after Tracie's set had finished, but I always made a point of coming out front to hear Dee sing Paris Match.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Leia did it. So, great.
Oh, wow. Really?
Getting a bit emotional now, thinking about it.
Oh man, yeah, that's a very special song. But yeah, that would have been incredible to have heard that. I've not seen or heard that in terms of they're doing it. Wow, what's life been like post Style Council?
After the Style Council, I did bits and pieces with like a jobbing bass player. Really, I worked a bit with Tony Hadley for a few years, and we did gigs, did an album in LA with Tony, did a bit with Kylie as well back in the 90s, not a huge amount. Just been kind of jobbing really and just gigging, just for fun really now. Got some great friends that I've been playing with for all my life that we still play. But what's good now is that I don't need to play for money. So it's kind of playing for the real reason, just to enjoy the material. Yeah. So.
Kevin, two final questions before you go. This has been Absolutely brilliant. I've loved every second of this, so thank you. You're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council, or solo. Which one's it going to be?
I'll have to go with Paris Match, I think. It's just got so many memories for me, and, just beautiful song.
Which version? Because there's a few, aren't there? Everything but the girl version as well, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Yeah. There are. Yeah. I like Paul's version. I like Dee's version. Probably Dee's version. When I was fresh into the whole kind of Respond and Style Council setup, that was the first time I'd heard that song. I don't think I remember hearing that before that point. I just thought, well, brilliant, poignant lyric, and just so different to anything that I'd heard from Paul before,
So European, which seems crazy now when you look at the world that we're in the UK with Brexit and everything. I loved all that. I love looking back at all that, of just how they embrace this idea that we are all of us in this together, and the European influences were such an important part of that band, and it just felt so different. And
yeah, absolutely. And it was so cool as well. That the cover with the Eiffel Tower and the black and white loafer, and that just, back in those days, it just reminded me of, and obviously there's the link to the Paris Match magazine, and it's almost like a magazine cover, just really cool, I thought.
The band looks so cool and so sharp. Were you part of that mix as well? Because I know Nicky Weller was involved at one point in terms of helping to stylize you lot. So
yeah, I don't know what. Well, I'd love to say yes, but I don't think I quite cut it in the style department. Not as far as Paul and Mick. I remember Nicky Weller taking in a pair of jeans for me once. I think I bought a pair of 501s just down the road in Oxford Street, and I thought the legs were too wide. And Nicky, actually, that was the day of the Miners' Benefit gig at the Royal Festival Hall, and I remember Nicky, taking my Levi's in and making them skinny at the bottom.
The whole idea of this podcast is for me, after 10 years since I gave up my life as a radio presenter, to be able to secure one interview with Paul Weller, the one that kind of got away, if you like. What should I ask him if it ever happens? Well,
I hope it happens for you, Dan.
Bless you.
I would love to know what he's done with all of those loafers over the years. Has he got a whole room? Has he got a room full of loafers? I'm sure he has.
Brilliant. I love that. I would love to know, because it seems like every time you see any picture, it's a different outfit. He's looking so cool. Yeah, you're right. What's that walking?
Yeah, his loafers always look brand new. I used to love loafers as well back in the early skinhead days when I was at school. But I'd buy them, and within 2 days, they look like they've been 2 years old, playing football in them and everything.
And also the monkey boots never look worn in, which is always, I'm like, well, he must have terrible blisters on his ankles.
Yeah.
Kevin, this has been brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's not a problem. Thanks. Enjoyed the chat. Thanks, Dan. Good luck.
Well, that was lovely once again, with some fabulous stories to tell. My thanks to Kevin Miller. Next up, and I can't quite believe that I'm saying this, a proper exclusive with somebody who has never spoken about her time in the Style Council before to anyone. Known as Jay Williamson back then, she sang with the band in 1984 whilst DC Lee focused on her solo work, and it's Jay that you would have watched in the Far Out, Far East Council Meeting in Japan concert film. Jay Ella Ruth, as she's known now, joins me on the very next episode. Make sure you subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts. You do not want to miss this one. Don't forget to share the episode on social media. Leave a review wherever you get yours. It really does help us to find new listeners to the show. Help us to spread the word, won't you? You can find us on Twitter. It's @WellerFanPod, or on Instagram and Facebook, Paul Weller Fan Podcast. I'll see you next time.